LCS roster rumors already happening. The summer split is not even for like another month and a half, and there's tons to talk about. EG blowing up the roster. We don't know where Vulcan's going. We don't know where Inspired's going. Someday, the whole crew, it sounds like, still up in the air. Of course, we need to start talking about the LCS altogether. We wanted to have an episode last week. Our fault, guys. We'll make sure to have those discussions this week about the health of the LCS, what it looks like in 5 years, and also, what does budget EG look like? Because that's the current rumor. Episode 122 of the Clown Fiesta podcast starts now with Blue Jay and JNT 250. Let's start with the rumors, JNT. Apparently, EG's blowing up. The rumor from Travis Gafford is that they are going, quote, mega budget. But he did also make sure to be clear that nothing is set in stone yet and that there's still lots of things that are happening behind the scenes. So things are moving around. But he also did rumor that Vulcan could be going to FlyQuest. However, we learned today that Vulcan might have signed with an EU agency. What does that mean?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to unpack. First thing is there's a difference I feel between budget and mega budget. Like I feel like the mega budget was added for a reason. That reason probably being that EG is not going to be very good coming into the summer split. And while I say not very good, that might be depending on the players that they acquire and what their roster shapes up to be compared to the rest of the LCS. But in all honesty, losing 4 out of the 5 players on their starting roster and rumoredly going for a bunch of cheap players is not likely to produce a very competitive roster.
Mega budget got me worried, and it's not just because EG that has me worried. Well, I mean that's a big part of it because EG was supposed to be one of our better teams, but also like the reason I'm worried is because like who's next to say they're going mega budget? You know, like we already have TSM that was mega budget last split. Immortals, although Immortals looks like they're going after some players, so maybe they're not as budget. But the point is, you're starting to gain a lot of teams in the LCS that are just not looking to win anymore, and that's what's got me worried.
Well, the one area where I will play a bit of devil's advocate is you take a look at a team like FlyQuest, and I think they've gone in a bit of the opposite direction, where it does seem like they are spending more and more on their LCS budget, at least in terms of the roster that they've been putting out, and obviously that is tied to the quality of the players that they decide to bring in. But I wonder if we're going to see some teams who potentially see this as an opportunity to spend more with some other top teams potentially spending less. You know, in this season alone, we have EG and now TSM who have openly and publicly said, hey, we are reducing our overhead for the coming summer split. And that's not a surprise to a lot of people based on a lot of the conversations that we've heard and have been happening throughout the entire spring split about low viewership and what direction is the LCS heading and whatnot. But with EG blowing up the roster, obviously other teams have to be there to pick up the pieces, and you got 4 premier players that are going to be on the market now. So I wonder if we're going to see some of the lower and potentially lower standing LCS teams go after some of these players in an attempt to climb up the standings if they feel it's for the right price and they have a good opportunity.
Yeah, you're totally right in pointing out that FlyQuest is actually kind of spending, and maybe this is a win opportunity for some of the other teams. How many teams are willing to spend? We don't know yet, but I guess it's kind of hard to say at this point, right? Because it seems like as time goes on, we hear more and more about how teams are going budget. So it's all speculation at this point. Now, I do think we should try to kind of pinpoint, since there's so many good players on EG that are looking for teams, I think we should kind of have the discussion about where is a good landing spot for all of these players. Which one do you want to start with when it comes to EG?
Well, I feel like we should start with the obvious one, which is Vulcan. I think he was the name that a lot of people were talking about right when this news came out, not only because Vulcan has been one of the best players in the LCS since he arrived, or maybe since he joined Cloud9, if we want to put it a little bit more accurately. Yeah, he was pretty good on Clutch, but nowhere near as good as he's been on teams like Cloud9 and Evil Geniuses. But obviously the other team that people were throwing around is FlyQuest, because the support position was kind of a disaster for them towards the end of the spring split. Obviously, everything was, roses and flowers to begin with FlyQuest, but they quickly turned into I shouldn't say quickly, but by the end of it, they turned into a team who really had a difficulty figuring out what their identity was and had a lot of problems, and a lot of those problems stemmed from support. So the simple math would say that Vulcan should be a target for FlyQuest.
Yeah, I wonder that as well. And it's so like I feel bad, but it also makes me laugh that like he could be potentially replacing Ayla, who, for those that may not remember, Ayla has been pretty vocal and straight up said in a Travis Gafford interview that like he doesn't like Vulcan, they don't get along, and a big part of it was because Vulcan said that he thought Winsome should have been starting over Ayla, and well, now it's possible that Vulcan could just take both of their spots, which I find to be kind of hilarious.
It's definitely it's a funny little storyline that we got.
Yeah, and then as far as Inspired goes, Inspired I'm a little bit more worried about. Now, Vulcan could absolutely be going to Europe like some people are hypothesizing. That is definitely still possible. And I would just say that I think it's even more likely for Inspired. Reason being that like I don't know where Inspired could go to the other teams in the LCS. When I look at all the jungle positions, most of them seem kind of locked up for the most part. Like I don't want to ever rule anything out, but like 100 Thieves has closer, Cloud9 has Blabber, CLG has contracts. Like I don't see any of those guys moving. So there's Spica with FlyQuest, River with Golden Guardians. I don't see that happening. Immortals has Kenvi. I don't see them spending for Inspired. Team Liquid with Piosik, maybe? Could TL go after a jungler? I could see that because I don't think Piosik had the greatest split, and I think TL's always been willing to spend regardless of what the esports climate is. And then TSM, we know they don't want to spend, so they're not going to go after Inspired. And then Dignitas, Santorin. I, I don't know if he would even want to go to Dignitas. And so it seems like not only is there not a lot of teams that are able to go after Inspired, I don't even know if Inspired would want to go to some of these other teams.
Yeah, it feels like with the LCS, when it comes to top players being free agents, it does feel like there's this sort of inherent limitation on the number of teams that a top player can go. Because if you're a top player and you are still performing like a top player, you don't want to go to teams who are outside of the playoff picture or teams who, for the most part, are generally at the bottom of the standings when it comes to the LCS. The teams that I'm talking about are teams like Immortals, Dignitas, CLG. For the most part, obviously CLG is doing a lot better now, but for top players who are free agents, it does feel like it can be cases where those teams are not even in your thought process whatsoever. Those aren't even teams you consider. However,
Yeah.
with Inspired's case, I think for Inspired, it's a little bit better than if he was a North American resident because Inspired does have the option to go back to the LEC and back to Europe. And I think that that's probably the most likely outcome based on what you were saying about, well, how many North American teams are really going to be going after a jungler? Because a lot of the top teams already have their jungler locked up for either the long term or just in terms of how they're performing. You know, it's unlikely that Cloud9 gets rid of Blabber, Under Thieves closer, Golden Guardians River. Um, was what was the other one that you said? FlyQuest was
Uh,
Spica.
Spica, yeah.
Yeah, and
I
then the
don't.
only other options that you have outside of those ones are your quote unquote budget teams or your just shitter teams, if we want to call them that. So I think for Inspired, the most likely scenario would be him going back to EU. My only question that I'm wondering is if he still has a good relationship with Koi/Rogue, does he go back there?
Do you think they would get
Because,
rid of Malrang for him? Maybe.
well, I mean, I'm no scientist, but Malrang, he has some for fun moments in the LEC, but you know,
He has some good moments too. Like
he
Malrang
does.
takes over a lot of games too. Like,
But at
okay,
the
if you're
same
asking me who
time,
I would take,
he can
if you're
go.
asking me who, yeah, like I would take Inspired over Malrang, but like let's not ignore that Malrang has had some good games since Inspired left the LEC. It's not like Malrang's been terrible, even though yes, he does run it down sometimes. He also takes over games, so it's like it's not so obvious to me that he would just slot back in there. And then, like we said with the LCS, where there's a bunch of teams that have junglers, the Europe still has a bunch of teams where they have junglers that they wouldn't want to replace. Like I don't think El Yoya is being replaced. BDS just had a really good split. I don't think Sheo's being replaced. Do you think Heretics is going to get rid of Yankos for him? I don't know. I don't even know if he would want to go to Heretics anyways. So like,
Yikes! Not
there's
leaving
kind of the same.
G2.
Yeah, there's kind of the same issue with Europe as with North America, but the point is there's still some teams that might want a jungler, like and like I guess Excel, honestly, Excel, Fnatic, honestly. Razork didn't exactly have the greatest year so far, so like there's a couple of suitors,
The
and
one team in the LEC that I was wondering, and obviously would if Vitality wanted to go after Inspired, that would mean that they'd have to drop the Bow project that they've been working on, and
mm-hmm.
you know I think Bow has obviously been a player in the LEC that has come with a lot of hype, but his performances haven't necessarily matched the hype. And obviously, a portion of that can be attributed to the champions that he's playing, because he's pretty much been put on Maokai duty for like the last. He's been on Maokai Sejuani duty pretty much ever since he came into the league, and we really haven't got to see any of like the mechanically god tier bow that you see on streams and in highlight montages and stuff like that. So I wonder if Vitality is thinking about making a move there. But that would be the one LEC team that I would point to, is if Inspired wanted to go to a top team. It feels like that's the only one where that option is possible.
Yeah. So anyways, there's lots of options out there. And Astralis, as Big Buster points out in the live chat, Astralis is another team that could maybe go after him. The other player, okay, lots of things in the air for Inspired, right? We'll just leave it there. That like lots of possibilities. What, dude? I know as soon as this episode is posted on YouTube, I just know it's going to be announced. Like Vulcan's going here, Inspired's going there. Like, anyways, someday another obviously valuable piece as well that is rumored to be leaving EG. I have a theory of where I think would be a good fit for him. Maybe I'll give you the chance to try to guess where my line of thinking is going, James.
Team Liquid, if they wanted to get rid of Summit.
No, well, I mean I'm not saying that that's not possible, but that's not the best suitor. I think it's Golden Guardians.
Oh yeah, maybe.
Which, because I believe Someday has residency, correct?
Yes,
I'm not wrong there.
That is correct.
The weird thing about that is that how bad would you feel for Licorice? So let's acknowledge Licorice had a good playoffs, but had a really bad spring split, right? And he had a really bad last couple of years, honestly. If you're Golden Guardians, are you absolutely sold? Like, oh, we got our guy because he had a couple of good playoff series? I would argue no, and I would argue I would feel much more comfortable with Someday in that roster, especially since River, Gory, and Huhi all speak Korean, which also so does Someday. Well, so that's cool and all.
Maybe you wonder if MSI is going to be a bit of a litmus test for
that's where
a
I was
player
going
like
next.
Licorice, one who, because Licorice, we haven't seen him on the international stage since 2019, I believe. So if his LCS performances are akin to his international performances, I would argue, yeah, that's probably a scenario that Golden Guardians is potentially looking to go down that road. But if Licorice goes at MSI and kind of smurfs, then it'd be difficult to argue replacing him with Someday.
You're a step ahead of me with talking about MSI, so you knew where I was going with this. But what if they don't have time to wait? And what if Licorice is replaced even before he plays one game of MSI?
That'd be
he'll still have
pretty
to play
wild.
MSI. He'll still have to play MSI, but wasn't there something similar with Fnatic a couple years ago where there was rumors that like someone was being replaced before Worlds even started?
I don't think
someone
so.
Can help refresh my memory.
I want to say you're like thinking of the whole upset bean thing that went on in 2021 Worlds, but I don't know.
Can't remember.
I don't recall any specific like upset is getting replaced next year before Worlds even happens. So I'm not sure.
I don't remember exactly what it was. So maybe you could be right. Maybe it was an upset thing. I just thought I remembered something like that happening with Fnatic, where it was rumored that he would be leaving. Buster Boy says Nemesis in 2020. That might have been it.
If my memory serves correct, it was not that he was going to get replaced during Worlds, or there was conversations about that. It was the fact that he got replaced pretty much right after Worlds ended. So I'm pretty sure the Nemesis situation was they basically replaced him right after Worlds ended, because Selfmade didn't want to play with him or something like that.
So the thing is, though, if that were to happen, the discussions for that happening probably happened while Worlds was happening or something like that. Anyways, I don't remember the specifics, but the point is, it would be tragic if, because people talk, rumors get out, it would be tragic if Licorice learned he's being replaced before MSI even happens. And I would say that it is possible in this scenario. Now, Someday could still go to a bunch of other teams, potentially. But like that to me is like one of the most interesting in a good and bad way, because I think it'd be really sad to be replaced, to know you're getting replaced and then have to go play a tournament. But like maybe Golden Guardians doesn't have time to sit and wait because they want to pounce on this opportunity before somebody else picks up Someday.
Yeah. I guess if you don't have anything more to say about the Golden Guardians thing, I would like to flip over to TL, because I kind of I said that was my other thought. And the only reason why I brought that up is because I feel like everybody knows that Summit has a very distinct play style, one in which the game kind of revolves around him. Summit is going to do anything and everything to push his leads or to try to gain a lead. And obviously that draws a lot of attention to his lane because junglers like to gank for him. Enemy junglers like to go after him to prevent him from acquiring those leads naturally in lane. So if TL were to change their whole philosophy of their roster from spring to summer, if that was even a possibility, I feel like that could be another team that might want to go after Someday, just because he does feel Someday does fill like that impact style role. Yeah, they're not necessarily the same player because Someday is just more carry centric than Impact is, but they do sort of fill that same void where, hey, we have this top laner who we're relatively going to leave completely alone on the top side of the map, and he's going to do just fine and do his thing. So if TL did want to go that route and kind of switching up their whole play style, that could be an option, but you know, if TL was replacing players, I feel like it'd be a massive roster overhaul, not just one or two players coming in and out.
Yeah, and it does fit the whole TLCK sort of thing, right? Where like you have the whole Korean speaking. So like it does suit. Like that is a team that's suited for him.
And it would free up an import slot for Team Liquid if they wanted to, if they felt the need to replace one of Harry or Jan, or they wanted to go a route with a different jungler. And I guess it wouldn't be a different jungler because PO6 is already an import, but frees up their options to do something at mid or AD carry if they felt that those guys weren't up to par.
Yeah, I think off seasons are always really difficult to predict altogether, but I think especially this one with Team Liquid is super difficult to predict because this lineup was like supposed to be an experiment of outworking everyone. Like I don't know if they've given up on that, or if they think like, hey, no, we can keep this roster and keep going with it. We just need to continue to outwork people and the results will come in summer. I don't know if they bail on that plan after not making playoffs. I wouldn't blame them if they bailed on it because like that is a significant underperformance. But who knows? Like, I don't know what to think about that team, honestly. The only guy that I don't think they could ever replace would be Core JJ.
Yeah, Core JJ is not going anywhere.
And I'm not even saying they should replace the other 4 players, but I'm saying that it's possible, you know?
Mm-hmm. And obviously the last guy who we have not yet talked about, but is still at a very high level, I would say. I think we both have mentioned this throughout the year. FBI has been pretty underrated through the entire spring split. He actually had a very, very good split. Was not that far behind Prince and Berserker in terms of individual statistics. Obviously, stats don't tell the whole story, and Berserker and Prince were like true 1v9 carry type players, and FBI is more a guy where he does his job and he does it very well, but he doesn't really skew outside the bounds of his defined role in a team.
Well, the thing is that I think a lot of people do kind of forget is that FBI continues to put out a lot of damage. Like, he might die a little bit more than some of the other AD carries, but he does do what the main job of an AD carry to do is, which is put out some freaking damage. And he's done that pretty consistently over the last, I don't know how long he's been in the LCS. So that's something that I don't think people can underrate, is that he's always very high on the damage meters. He might just miss position a little bit in team fights, but you're not going to have to worry about having that true, I'm going to try to carry this game AD carry. So that's something you get with FBI. I don't know where he could go though.
Yeah, the problem that I think that Someday and FBI have compared to Inspired and Vulcan is, one, Inspired and Vulcan are very clearly at the top of their role within the LCS. Inspired has been the best jungler, if not the second best performing jungler since he came here. And Vulcan has been the best support in the LCS, consistently over the last 4 years. So I think those
Core JJ a little bit, but yeah, I still agree with you. But I mean, we got to throw Core JJ in that conversation as well.
It's those two, but I think I remember we talked about this a little bit before. I don't want to get too off topic here, but we did talk a little bit before how much blame do we throw on Core JJ? And it feels like the fan base overall seems to be chucking some more blame at Core JJ these days than days past.
You're right, 100%. You're definitely right. And I think it's warranted, by the way. I don't think Core JJ has been that good. And I think Vulcan has taken that number 1 support spot. But if we're talking about since Vulcan joined the league, it was a little bit closer back a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. But like you said, we don't need to get too off topic.
Yeah, but my point is that Vulcan and Inspired are, they are already top players at their respective position and have been for a very long time. So that will just naturally make them a little bit more desirable than players like Someday and FBI, who are great and do warrant, they warrant the praise and they warrant probably extra money relative to your average, league pro, but they're not at that level. So I wonder if that's going to hurt someday in FBI in sort of the free agent market compared to players like Inspired and Vulcan who are in that tier above them. But, someday in FBI presumably are also they're looking at the rest of the LCS and be like, we're not worth minimum. If we're gonna have to be changing teams and go to a different roster, like we can't be going to these budget rosters because we're not budget players. So
Yeah.
I just wonder if those two players are gonna have a more difficult time finding a team for summer 2023, and if that causes a player like Someday to now go look at options back in Korea, or if that causes FBI to go look at options elsewhere. So
Yeah.
I think
And
Inspired and Vulcan, if I had to make a prediction, I think Inspired and Vulcan will very easily get a spot in the LCS or the LEC. I would not be worried about that at all. However,
yeah.
Someday in FBI would not surprise me at all if A, they don't find a team for summer 2023, or B, they're in a different league.
Which is wild, right? It's wild to be like, oh, they don't have a spot. But let's remind people that this is not all that new. We're seeing good players that go without teams.
Yeah.
Whippo, Jensen,
Upset.
there's a million, right? Like this should be uncharted territory, but it's not. It's kind of been the norm for the last couple of years. So to see good players without teams is not that irregular, or not. Yeah, it's just not that irregular. Now, I know we've been talking about where the EG guys can go, but for EG to go, quote, mega budget, which is still just a rumor, but that's the rumor that we'll go with for this discussion. Who the hell's going to fill these spots, JNT 250?
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to my first point at the top of the episode where, like, what does mega budget mean? Because, like, is mega budget meaning we are going to legitimately pay the bare minimum that we can possibly pay players? And if that is the case, then I think we're likely to see EG with a very lackluster roster, probably comprised of old LCS veterans / very, very green, Challenger League players.
I wonder if now Revenge goes over to Evil Geniuses and gets stuck on a budget roster again, but just with a different org, which I chuckle a little bit because, I mean, look, I am not the biggest believer in Revenge. I do not think that he's been particularly great. However, a lot of the LCS pros have been outspoken about how they think he is underrated and how he would do better on another team. And so I'm sorry if I find it a little bit funny that he might go to another team and it might still be another budget roster.
Yeah, I do want to throw Revenge a bit of sympathy because I think I'm in the same boat as you where I'm not as big of a Revenge believer as the majority of the LCS community and the LCS itself. However, throughout 2023, I have definitely paid more attention to him, mainly because he has been one of the few LCS pros that has done a very good job of trying to put himself out there in terms of, social media content and posting stuff on, YouTube and Twitter and trying to stay very active in the community. And I think I've seen that sort of like grinder side towards him where this guy truly wants to be a great player and he's trying to do everything that he can to be a good player. And so I definitely have a ton of respect for him for that. So I would like to see him on a new team, on a different org, and just give him a bit of a fresh start. A fresh start can be good for a number of reasons. And with a player like Revenge, who seems to have all the potential in the world, but hasn't necessarily put it all together on stage, even playing with a singular good player like Jojopyun could potentially flip that switch, and that's all he needs. So I would be a fan of it, and hopefully the roster isn't too budget to where Revenge is playing with a bunch of shitters.
Not to open another can of worms, but is Jojopyun a good player? Like, we think he's supposed to be, but he wasn't last split.
It's definitely a fair question, but I would argue that yes, Jojopyun's still a good player.
Yeah,
maybe not a great player.
I think most people are of the opinion that he's still got it in him, but he's really going to have to prove himself now because he lost one of the best junglers in the league and one of the best supports in the league. If the rumors are true, I'm going to have to keep saying that, but.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then I don't even know what else to speculate as far as what other people are going to go to EG. Maybe they just promote some academy or challenger or whatever players. I don't know.
I guess the only players on EG, their challenger league team, the only players of note are Soul and Shiden on that team. Soul, formerly of TSM and TSM Academy, where he did play 4 games in LCS and there was that whole hilarious thing where TSM publicly said that we believe Soul's a top 4 player, can become a top 4 player in the league, and just dumped him to the fucking wayside not even 2 months later. So, but Shiden is another guy who people talk about a lot in the academy scene. I want to preface this, the both of us, we do not follow the academy scene whatsoever, but I will sort of give people who are covering the academy scene the benefit of the doubt when it comes to talking about players who could be in the LCS in the future. And Shiden has been a name that people have thrown out a lot. He's been on Cloud9, I believe. He was on Cloud9 Challenger last year, all of last year. So he kind of comes from the Cloud9 ecosystem. So LCS potential there, maybe.
I also want to point out that even though it seems like there's not a lot of players available to fill these spots, I still think there actually are a lot of people that we just kind of forget about. God, I can't even remember his name now. Zazel. Zazel's one that he's definitely still good enough to play.
Used
in
to
the
be
LCS,
on EG as well.
presume. Yeah. Biofrost is another guy. I don't know what's going on with him. Actually, never mind, because he recently announced that he was going to be streaming for Dignitas. Although with that said, that doesn't mean anything. Actually, he could totally still be like, "Oh, I got a team. Never mind," and still sign with a team. Like, there's lots of guys that still want to play in the LCS. Armeo, there's the Cloud9 Challenger team that Jack said is like, "Hey, I'm willing to put guys in the LCS without a buyout." So there's still a lot of different guys that could slot into these LCS spots, even though it may seem like there's not a lot. There is.
Yeah, and obviously you have some of the older LCS veterans, like your Hansers, your Svenskarens, trying to think of your Darshans. I don't know, that could be an option potentially. I don't know if he's actually on a Challenger League team this split, but I mean he's been in the Academy / Challenger League scene for about 2 years now. So
yeah,
maybe Darshan's making a comeback. Maybe he's going back to Zion Spartan for the comeback.
Maybe, honestly.
Didn't he do that for a split where he changed back to Zion Spartan and then changed back to Darshan?
I think he did, but yeah.
His teacher stopped calling him Zion Spartan.
Okay, enough with the memes. What other things happened? So Immortals, they also made some moves which I was kind of surprised by. They, instead of Revenge, obviously they went with Solo. I thought that was interesting. I think that is actually an upgrade. And they put Fleshy down to challengers, and they brought in Treats, which I think is actually another good signing. Now, I wonder. I watched a little tiny bit of Treats when he was co-streaming LCS, and he seemed to still really believe in tactical. I wonder if when he gets there, he's going to realize tactical ain't the same player he was a few years back, or maybe all tactical needed was a support that he felt comfortable playing with, and maybe Treat's the perfect guy to make that work. I don't know, but regardless, I actually think Immortals upgraded the roster, which I did not expect to be saying.
For the people who don't know, Tactical and Treats played together on TSM Academy in 2020, I believe it was.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
Before Treats got briefly promoted to the LCS team in summer 2020, but that didn't end up working out before he went back to EU to join SK. But I really like the pickup of Treats, and
me too.
Obviously, it most likely has something to do with Tactical being on that team. Whether or not that was the cause of Tactical saying, "Hey, Treats is a free agent. I used to play with this guy. He's nuts. Let's go get him." Or Treats, obviously, he still has the urge to compete. He's been very vocal about that, and maybe Immortals was just sort of the team that he felt he needed to join to get himself back in there, because maybe he feels he can do good things for that team because he has faith in Tactical. While I don't think the rest of the league community has faith in Tactical, that he can still be a great player because of the numerous mistakes he's made over the last 2 years, basically. But if anyone's going to fix him, it'll be Treats, because...
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the way I think they're looking at it. They're like, look, we don't want to go after another 80 carry. If there's someone to fix this guy, it's probably one of the guys that he played with before.
And dude, people shouldn't forget, even if you're not an LEC fan, if you're exclusively an LCS fan and don't know who Treats is, when Treats was playing in the LEC, he was one of the better supports in that league. I recall the last split that he played support in the LEC, I thought he was a top 5 support personally.
Yeah, he was good. I was surprised he didn't get a team, but maybe I shouldn't be surprised anymore, because we went through the whole list of good players that don't get teams.
Yeah, so if you're an Immortals fan, if you are, how the hell did that happen? But be glad that... No, I'm just saying, these are moves that your team should be very happy about, because in our humble opinion, Solo is an upgrade over Avenged, and Treats is definitely a good player.
Yeah, and then it's rumored that Rich is supposed to be placing Armut. Is that rumored or is that confirmed?
I think it
Probably
was.
just rumored.
I think it was a rumor, but it does seem somewhat concrete because just the amount of people who are talking about it.
I feel I feel a little bad because it almost is like we saw it coming. Like even when Armut first signed with Dignitas before the split even happened, I think everyone was kind of like, really? Like I don't think a lot of people had faith in that signing, and I believe he was late to join the LCS. Was he late to join the LCS? He was, right?
No, he arrived on time for week 1, but he didn't scrim or practice at all with the
Oh,
team.
okay, but okay, that's still late though, right?
Yeah,
Because every other team gets to
he
practice and scrim
was
in advance or whatever.
late
So
to arriving in North America.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. And so like that is something that you need to consider when a player struggles over the course of a split. Like he didn't get to the same amount of time with his teammates as other top laners did. So you got to take that into account. But it was like the result is what everyone expected, and everyone expected to be able to doubt him. And I kind of feel bad for him. Like that's not the way you want to go out, right?
Yeah. Insert obligatory. Rich was the faker of Heroes of the Storm because whenever you talk about this guy, you have to mention that he was the faker of Heroes of the Storm.
That is funny.
Yeah, it is.
Like it because to me it means nothing. like like that game was not a very popular one.
I don't think I played it
Uh
a single time. I'm trying to
neither
think.
did I. I never played it once. But yeah, that like if that's what people are saying to hype up this guy, I'm a little worried. No?
Well, the other thing, if we want to actually use something to hype him up, he was the number 1 All Pro LPL top liner in 2022 in spring.
There we go. Let's
So
go. There's some reason to
now,
get
unfortunately, the team that he was on, Victory 5, they failed horribly when it came to making
mm,
Worlds in 2022. That was the team that had Karsa and a rookie on it. So, yeah, but they flopped pretty hard in the summer split. They were a very good regular season team, but failed in playoffs every split. So, take that how you will.
okay. And then the last thing I want to mention, this is like very loose rumor, guys, but I did hear it on Hotline League, so I'm just going to mention it. There was someone mentioned on Hotline League the potential of Jensen going to 100 Thieves. I think that is a very loose rumor, so take that with a grain of salt. But if that's the case, I do think that is interesting. Just because Jensen, I think he played with Double Lift before, right? On Team Liquid, right?
Yep. They were
So
playing
that's
together for a year.
yeah, and like Jensen didn't have the greatest split. I think if there's a way that he can bounce back, it's probably going to play with guys like Closer and Double Lift. So I think that's kind of cool. And hopefully, if that happens, we see a little bit of resurgence for Jensen. But
Also feels like Jensen for his entire career has been compared to Bjergsen, but for the most part, they play the same style, so it does feel like a pretty easy fit for the 100 Thieves side.
yeah. Okay, before we move on, I just want to remind people to subscribe, hit the like button, and comment and stuff. And by the way, we're sorry for missing our episode last week. Just some communication issues, some things that are, I don't know, they're complicated. But we're going to try to continue to do episodes regularly. Honestly, guys, at this point, I still don't even know for sure when our next episode is going to be. Do you,
Yeah,
Ginther?
the MSI schedule has not been released yet. I know they only just drew the MSI groups today, but the actual dates and times they'll be playing matches are unknown. Obviously, it's in London, so we will hopefully like to get episodes out after the conclusion of, each stage or each, important after the important matches in each stage of MSI. So we don't know what the schedule is, but we will let you know as soon as the schedule for MSI gets posted.
We'll be tweeting when we go live. That's the only way that we can continue to do that because we will probably know pretty last minute. So follow at BlueJ_GG or follow at JNT250. He'll sometimes like or retweet it, and so maybe you'll find it through there. Okay, LCS JNT. It's time to talk about the health of the LCS, which I don't want to be too doomer about this topic, but there are some realities that we have to face as LCS fans, and that is that the LCS is not particularly doing well, and we had another split of viewership going down. So, I guess let's start with why do we think that is, JNT? Rather than just, oh, LCS is dead XD, which I see is where the conversation ends a lot of the time, I think it's good to have the conversation of trying to pinpoint why things are happening, and maybe if there's some things that the LCS can do to turn things around.
Well, I mean, I guess if we want to start with the obvious answer, and in the likely solution is a lot more difficult than the answer because the LCS just is not a competitive region relative to the rest of the world. I know the LCS is a major region, and even though the LCS does not necessarily compare to the LEC, the LPL, and the LCK when it comes to international performances, I still believe that the LCS should be considered a major region.
Mm-hmm.
I do, I think potentially skewing, like world seeding and MSI seeding, how that compares to, EU, China, and Korea, that's all important. But, you know, when it comes to the LCS being a competitive region, part of the reason why the viewership just hasn't been as high in recent years is because the teams aren't as good and the matches don't have as high of stakes. Because you look at the LCS finals, for example, from, not even 2 weeks ago, and it was Cloud9 versus Golden Guardians. And just inherently, it felt like people weren't necessarily super excited for that finals matchup, apart from the fact that it was Golden Guardians' first, finals appearance and had the Golden Guardians was heading to MSI. So I find it very difficult to imagine that the competitiveness of the LCS is suddenly going to skyrocket or increase over the next 2 to 3 years. So that's why I say that the solution is, there isn't necessarily a solution, because unless the LCS just rapidly increases and becomes more competitive, and don't get me wrong, I think everybody's hoping that that is the case. And I think that that is probably the simplest answer when it comes to increasing the viewership is, well, how do we get one of the best ways to get people interested in your league, in your region, is when your region and your league is playing really well.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's good to acknowledge, because I think you're totally right. The LCS is not as competitive as these other regions, and that is something that there isn't exactly the easiest fix for. So let's start with you kind of alluded to it there, but has the LCS lost its hype? I think you would have to argue, yes, it has. And maybe we could dig into that a little bit, because when you and I were watching the finals, you, big Cloud9 fan, I didn't really hear you get all that excited during the finals when Cloud9 is winning the finals, right? And I would argue for myself, just noticing the difference in hype, if we rewind like 8 years ago, I was way more hyped for finals back then than I was today. And so maybe we could try to dig into why the LCS has lost its hype, if you agree with that. I'm guessing you have.
Yeah, no,
You do agree with that, rather?
I would say it's a little bit difficult to say, just because I'm inherently going to be a bit biased, because obviously I was super hyped for all the old finals as well when Cloud9 was a part of them.
So. Yeah. Well, and so here's the thing. Here's the difference between when I was super hyped back then versus today. So full disclosure, I was once a massive Cloud9 fan. I haven't been for the last few years, but the point is I was at a time. And one of the biggest reasons why was because after LCS happened throughout the week, I could watch a duo with Sneaky and Meteos, and that was awesome. That content was amazing. Now, Meteos didn't stream nearly as much as Sneaky did, but the point is that you could interact with those players, right? And something that this is not new, this is not a new take, but we hear all the time that LCS players need to be able to interact with fans more often, or vice versa, and that the players just don't interact with the community. That is a problem that has been highlighted for years and has still not been fixed. So that's one of the issues, right? The other one is, you hear this all the time, LCS teams need to make more content. There are some teams that make content, but there's also some that don't. And the perfect example is Golden Guardians. They came out with this awesome video at the start of the year, right? The fuck you video. Everyone loved it. I've talked about it a million times. I thought it was awesome. And then they have a really cool story that happens over the course of the split. They start off 0-4. Oh, we didn't have all of our players, but then once we did, we went on a 7-game win streak. We're pogging. And then, oh no, we tripped at the finish line before playoffs started. Oh, everything's starting to crumble. And then they get their shit back together, and then they go on the playoff run, and they're going to MSI, and there's no documentation, no content around any of it. And it's like, shouldn't that be one of the best times to highlight the story of the players behind the scenes of what's going on? Like, that is another swing and a miss. And I promise I'm almost done ranting. The other one is just making the LCS easy to consume. This is another thing that people have said for years. Like, we're always changing the schedule. There was Saturday, Sundays, and then Monday Night League. Or there was Friday Night League, Saturday, Sunday. And then they switched from that, and now it's during the week. And it's like, you're always changing the schedule. It seems like it's making it more and more difficult to consume the LCS all the time, because now it's during the week. And it's like, these are things that we've known for so long, those three things of player engagement, LCS making content, LCS teams making content, and then making the product easy to consume. And the LCS and the community altogether, all of us combined, we have failed at fixing all of those things. And so when you highlight that, doesn't it seem pretty obvious why the LCS is like continuing to fall in viewership? Like, I think that's I we know the reasons, but nothing gets done about it, and that's what's really surprising and a little bit frustrating, I have to say.
Yeah, I think the LCS teams are naturally going to have. Sorry, hold on. Let me restart there. The LCS teams are naturally going to have more fans at the top than they are at the bottom, and that's just going to be due to performance. But as you mentioned, there are a lot of things that these lower tier teams can do in order to draw interest for their split. You look at the Golden Guardians case with their video that they made at the beginning of the year, like the Operation Fuck You, like whether or not they had a super successful split, like that video was added value regardless. They made this video, and if they went out and had a normal Golden Guardian split, it would have been fine. They just released piece of content, but they released this video. Now there's this whole storyline behind it. It's even, it's multiplied because of that. And I feel like a lot of other teams can be doing these types of things in order to drum up some interest and a reason to get invested in this season, or get invested in this team, or get invested in these players. But you pretty much see it only from your 100 Thieves, your Cloud9, your Team Liquid, kind of, although like Team Liquid doesn't do it as much anymore. TSM doesn't do it as much anymore. There's very little behind the scenes content within the LCS. It's pretty much only Cloud9, and then you throw in Team Liquid, 100 Thieves, and TSM in that conversation.
You know what's ironic about the Golden Guardians part too is that like the whole fuck you video was about no one believing in them, right? And we believe in our team. But the irony for me is that if the content team truly believed in that team being able to win, wouldn't they have had like a bunch of content slated to go? Like, hey, on this awesome run that we're going to be doing content around this team because we believe that this team's going to make a run. Like, if you knew that you were going to go to MSI, you're going to have content around that, right? So like the irony is that I don't think the content believed in them either. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe I'm jumping ahead to some conclusions. But like, it seems to me if you actually believed in them, or you actually believed in yourself, there would be a bunch of content ready to go around these players.
But I guess my earlier point was whether or not they themselves believed it, it gave other people a reason to invest in the Golden Guardians. Be like, oh wow, these guys actually were backing up their shit talking. So
yes,
it's like I said, it's more about giving other fans and other teams and other players a reason to invest in your team and your players in your season. Because as a person who is a Cloud9 fan, I like NA, I follow NA, but for me, it's Cloud9 is the end all be all. But when you see stuff like that, I need to find a reason to get invested in watching like Cloud9 versus Golden Guardians. Like for me as a Cloud9 fan, when I look at Cloud9 versus Golden Guardians, I look at a free win. But if this whole thing that Golden Guardians is running with, that hey, our team is actually better than expected, and there was a bit of like a Cloud9 versus Golden Guardians thing going on during the split where Sven was calling them like frauds and whatnot, and that was a reason for me to get invested in those matchups versus Golden Guardians versus like Cloud9 versus Immortals. Like that's a free win. Like I don't even have to pay attention here, but against Golden Guardians, like you actually had to pay attention because they were a decent team.
Yeah, and even though I'm harping on the whole like players need to engage with the community and LCS needs to make more content, or LCS teams need to make more content, and like you need to make the product easier to consume. I'm not saying all of these issues are easy to fix, but I am saying that if they go unfixed, we can't be surprised that in every split we see the viewership continue to drop more and more and more. And so it feels like, and by the way, that's only like 3 things. There could be like a list of 20 or 30 different things that we could add to the list that people have identified for a long time that the LCS needs to fix. That's just 3 that I came up with real quick, just for the sake of conversation.
Well, one of the first things that you mentioned was the schedule change, and you even sort of you briefly touched upon all of the schedule changes that the LCS has gone through in the past like 2 to 3 years. It was originally like from pretty much the get-go, LCS was always on Saturdays and Sundays. That's how it always was. And then, yes, they slowly introduced the idea of Friday Night League and then Monday Night League. And then they went for an entire year where they did 3 days. They did Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And now we've switched over to the Thursday, Friday. So I would also argue that the scheduling has been a pretty big point in terms of a drop in viewership, because when you have a sport, whether or not it's esports or a sport, for the most part, when it's happening. There is a designated time almost any given day where it's, hey, it's Thursday. I know that a basketball game is going to be on at 7 o'clock. Oh, it's Sunday. I know that there's going to be football going on at 1 o'clock, 4:05, 7, 8:20, whatever it is. When it's Monday night, I know there's a football game happening at 8:20 on Monday. When it's Thursday, I know there's happening. So my point that I'm trying to say here is, on a year-to-year basis, we don't even know when the LCS is happening. Like, next year, it would not surprise me at all if there's 3 days of LCS or the time has been changed again. One thing that I thought was interesting, don't want to go off topic here too much, but
Go off topic.
In the John Needham interview that he did with Travis Gafford, one of the things that he said with regards to the LCS scheduling is the league still would have preferred to play the matches at noon on the West Coast. That was a decision that was purely made because of the backlash from the fans. If the ball was in their court, I mean, it is, but if it was solely up to them, they still would have ran the matches at, noon PST to get EU viewers involved, as John Needham put it. But I thought that was
wild, right?
Absolutely ridiculous. Like, what in the hell?
Yeah, and I don't want to just dog on John Needham because I think he's doing the best he can to get viewership up, but I think you're missing something really important when you're saying, yeah, we would have loved to get those European viewers, and it's like, bro,
you can't even get your North American viewers. Like, how are you expected to hold the European audience when you can't hold your native audience?
Not to mention, like, a North American viewer should be way more valuable to a North American product when you're going to have North American sponsors. So that is.
I don't know about insurance companies in the EU, but I don't think State Farm exists in Europe. So, what the hell going on there?
Didn't the LCS lose that one?
Oh, did they? Well, that's.
I don't know. Maybe I wasn't.
I think you're right.
Used to be the State Farm analyst. I haven't heard that.
You are right. You're right. You're right. Actually.
No, but the point stands, though, that, like...
Is Verizon in Europe? I don't fucking know if Verizon's in Europe. Like...
I don't think so. Is Verizon even in Canada?
No.
So it's probably not in Europe.
Probably not.
I don't know. Maybe someone in Europe will let us know if it actually is.
I hope everyone is trying to understand the point that we're trying to make here is, with North America and the North American League, they talk a lot about how important sponsorships are, and when you're pandering, you're not pandering, but you're involving your broadcast to support, potentially a wider audience that includes, different countries. That's not necessarily the best thing for your North American sponsors.
Yeah. And it makes me wonder what the LCS is going to look like if they're continuing to push it in a direction to go for more European viewers. Which, I mean, look, if that's what they think that they need to do to keep the LCS alive, okay, but maybe we should start having the conversation, J&T, of what does the LCS look like in 5 years? Because I think that even if you would have asked me a year ago, if you would have asked me, are you worried for the LCS going away soon? I would have said, no, not soon. And maybe I still feel that way, but I definitely feel less confident.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think everybody is questioning, the future of the LCS and what the LCS could look like in 5 years because of all the teams that are exiting. TSM and CLG were two of the founders of League of Legends, pretty much. I didn't say in North America, I said the founders of League of Legends. It feels like TSM versus CLG, that was the original rivalry that people talk about when it comes to League esports. I know a little bit later you got TSM Cloud9, and then you look at other regions around the world, Fnatic versus G2 in like 2016, 2017, 2018, all that. There was the telecom wars in early, LCK/OGN, but the first one was TSM versus CLG, and those orgs are no longer involved within the esport anymore, basically, or trending towards not being involved in the esport altogether. So you look at some of the teams that are in the landscape of the LCS right now, like, what's the turnover going to look like? How many of these teams that are currently in the LCS right now, are they even going to be here in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years? So, we really have no idea.
And so if they don't, what does that look like if they're not around?
Well, I don't know. One thing that I'll go back to the John Needham, Travis Gafford interview that Travis brought up is the league still going to be a 10-team league? And is there going to potentially be any structural changes to the league being a North American league versus being an America's league? And the reason why I bring that up for the Valorant people out there, the way that they run VCT Americas is it's a American league, American including both North and South America, where 5 of the teams are North America, or I guess US based. I don't want to say North American based because I think one of them is Canadian based, but North American based 5 teams, and then 5 teams that are based out of Latin America and South America.
Yeah. Which, and they also mentioned, John Needham also said, like, I'll admit that, like, it's hard to sustain 93 teams. So not only is it possible that there's a mix of all of the Americas having different teams, but also maybe there's just fewer teams. And what's kind of funny is a couple years ago, we had some sort of discussion on this show about, like, one day, I remember saying that my prediction was that in 5 to 10 years, the LCS would end up going with Europe and they would kind of combine. But now that Valorant exists, I'm kind of thinking it's more going to be similar to that, like you're mentioning, where it might be a combination of like Brazil joining North America or vice versa, like CBLOL and North America joining together, and maybe that's what the LCS looks like in 5 years. So maybe my prediction was off because I got the wrong region as far as what would might maybe mix with the LCS.
Yeah, I mean, if we are to take Valorant as the leading example now of what the Riot ecosystem could look like, I would say that we are definitely trending towards the Valorant style of things, and compared to the original League style of things, where we've already seen the LEC announced at the beginning of this year that they have now combined themselves to be EMEA. It is no
Mm-hmm.
longer like, LEC is not the European League. It's one whole league of EMEA, which now includes, Turkey is a part of the European Regional League, and there's like a last chance Worlds qualifier that includes all of those regional leagues of like TCL and uh like the French league, the German league, the whatever. Like those are going to have Worlds implications now. So I wonder if we see the similar format that has been introduced in Valorant shift over to LoL, where we see leagues like the LCS, the LLA, and the CB merging in some sense.
The difficulty, one of the difficulties with that happening though, is because it feels like League of Legends was the guinea pig of esports in certain ways, because we went into this franchising thing, right? And 10 teams have their franchise spot. And now it's like, okay, but how can we get some of them to get let go of their franchise spot so that we can have fewer teams, right? That's where, like, the LCS has gone in this direction where they kind of commit to stuff where they're stuck, right? One of them is we're stuck with 10 teams where we don't really need 10 teams, right? And the other one is we're stuck with weekdays now, whereas VCT took the weekend spot and we can't go back to weekends. And so it feels like to me like the LCS is just the guinea pig, or League of Legends esports altogether is kind of the guinea pig, where Riot learns all of the hard lessons through League of Legends and they implement better versions in VCT. And so I'm a little jealous, I have to say, that like VCT says, hey, you know what? Instead of charging teams for these franchise spots, we're just going to pay them to be in the franchise or be part of franchising, and we'll incentivize them to create content, which, as we said earlier, is an issue that the LCS struggles with. And so it feels a little bad to see the LCS struggling with issues that we can't go back on now, right? They
Mhm.
make these changes and we're stuck.
Yeah, I mean, one of the, I guess, I don't know how to, trying to find a creative way to introduce this, but with the LCS seeming to be struggling in viewership over the last few years, one of the leagues that has been increasing very that have been performing very, very well year over year is the CBLOL.
Mm-hmm.
There was a Reddit post sometime this past week or 2 weeks ago that said that the CBLOL actually overtook the LCS in viewership for the first time ever, both in
Mm-hmm.
peak viewers and average viewers throughout the entire season. And obviously, I think I mentioned this 2 weeks ago. The CBLOL has a lot of teams. They have a lot of organizations with massive, massive fan bases. You talk about teams like Kaboom, Pain, Loud. Loud is probably the. I don't have. This is just pure like guesswork, but I would assume that Loud is probably the biggest esports org, like social media wise, in the Americas.
In the Americas, I could
I
see it. Like,
I
I don't follow enough to know for sure either, but I see why you're guessing that.
I'm pretty sure Loud is. Loud is the green like triangle for people who don't know. But my point being is combining, potentially combining these leagues could actually be a good thing for the LCS, because players and teams in the CBLOL obviously draw a lot of interest, both individually and organization wise. So
Yeah.
while people might think like, oh, it's doom and gloom if we have to merge with the CBLOL, merging with the CBLOL and the LLA could be a good thing. It can just bring more eyes into the LCS. So,
I would see it as a plus because that's a league that's trending in a much better direction than the LCS is right now. The question, I think it's also fair to ask, like, if you're CB LOL and you're doing, pretty well, do you even want to join with the LCS? You're like, hey, those guys suck. Those guys are losing viewership all the time. Why do we want to hitch our wagon to that? Whatever,
But I
you
guess
know.
one thing that could be important to note is we talked about the structure of VCT. VCT is 5 NA teams and 5, sort of Latin America, South America teams. I wonder if a similar thing could be implemented in with League of Legends. You take the top 5 LCS teams and you take the top 5 CBLOL/LLA teams, and you've got 10 very popular and strong teams. Like, we cut the fat of, your Dignitas, your Immortals, your CLG/NRG. You put Loud, Pain, and, other teams like that in there, and all the matches now are going to have massive interest and intrigue.
Yeah. And we talk about what the future of LCS looks like, but with Riot being like the big esports organization, as far as like they're having multiple esports that are having a lot of viewership, you kind of learn that the future of esports is kind of just going to be determined by what Riot learns as they make more and more esports, right? Like as time goes on, maybe the future of not just LCS or League of Legends, maybe the future of esports is cutting up leagues into different regions as far as like the Americas and EMEA. Like maybe that becomes universal across esports in general in the next 5 years.
Yeah. Now, I guess to talk about it a little more domestically compared to internationally, one person whom a lot of LCS fans and people have said, what am I trying to say? Mr. Beast. I'm trying to say Mr. Beast.
I knew where you were going with this. I knew it.
Mr. Beast has long been a person who preaches that he wants to be involved in the LCS, and if we're just talking domestically, not trying to involve other teams internationally, is that a guy who still is invested in North American League with this continued decline? So I feel like it's another question that we have to ask ourselves. Like, if the LCS is not doing what it needs to do to improve, like, do you then lose a person like Mr. Beast who's like, well, now it's not worth my time?
Well, and it's possible that you've already lost Mr. Beast. Like, it's been a while since he said that he was interested, right? If I remember right, wasn't that like a couple of years ago?
I think he first said it like in late 2020,
So it
early
has been a couple of
2021.
years
And
then.
then I don't recall, like, they did the Mr. Beast event, but I think that was in
Yeah, and then
2021.
They didn't let Bjergsen or Doublelift play in it or something, right? Wasn't
It
that?
was, yeah, Double played in it. Bjergsen did.
Oh, because Doublelift wasn't part of the LCS at that time.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. Oh my
I think that
god,
was
man.
late 2021 when that event happened.
Yeah, and the thing is, at this point, like, I wouldn't blame Mr. Beast at all if he's no longer interested, because he's like, dude, like, I got a brand and a reputation to keep, and like, this is a league that is slowly losing more and more viewers. Like, why would I, want to join this league if it's losing interest? Like, he's got a million projects to work on. I wouldn't be surprised if LCS is no longer a priority for him.
Mhm. And then obviously the other established organizations that people have thrown out throughout the years have been, Sentinels with their involvement in Valorant, other teams like Optic, and even FaZe Clan. Although I think out of all those, Sentinels is probably the only realistic option. One, because they're based in North America. I know FaZe is based in North America, but it feels like for esports purposes, they are more a European org. I only say that mainly because, like, Counter-Strike, I know, like, there's FaZe, Call of Duty, and everything, but
Mhm.
for my money's worth, it seems like for the most part, FaZe is a European org when it comes to esports, but maybe that's just me not giving a fuck about Call of Duty talking, so who knows? And then Optic, like, no offense to Optic, but I don't want to see them in the LCS. Like, they're a COD team. When they were in the
Well, they were
LCS,
here.
when they were here, they weren't doing anything. They weren't invested. Like, they put out lackluster rosters. So
Been there, done that.
they're not a team that I'm super interested in. The Sentinels is obviously the one that people will point to, partially because they're already involved in the Riot ecosystem, being in the Valorant scene. But it does feel like the options are not endless in terms of replacement possibilities.
One of the last ideas or things that I want to talk about when it comes to just esports in general, and one thing that I think esports needs to try in North America, is actually being based out of New York. I know that I am not the first person to say this, but one of the reasons why I think that's becoming more and more needed is because if esports are going to be played during the week, like the LCS is right now, I think the LCS would be much better suited in New York right now. I'm not saying that they should just get up and leave and it's so easy. Oh, snap your fingers, no problem. We're in New York now. But what I am saying is, I think it's really important to have an in-person audience, and I think it's really important that if John Needham says it's so important to go after European viewers, wouldn't it make sense to have it be more New York based rather than LA? And so
You
the
get like a
time difference
bonus
isn't
3 hours, basically.
right. And so what I'm thinking is, if anyone, whether it's Riot or it's a different organization, whatever, is making a new esport that they plan on having the regular schedule be in the middle of the week, I think it needs to be in New York. I think that's where you should kind of look to go. And again, I'm not saying, oh, the LCS should just get up and go to New York, easy peasy, no problem. But I do think that you got to look at how many people are in New York and how much of the demand there still is for esports in New York. Like, New York is a massive freaking city.
The other
So yeah,
option that I would throw out there would be Chicago, only because that's where the
sure.
servers are.
Yep.
And if, we want to rehash the conversation of ping and whatnot, like that is like the absolute best right there is just go to
What's the
Chicago.
ping from New York to Chicago?
Well, I mean, I'm like right near New York and I get, if I had good internet, like really good internet, I'd probably be like high 20s ping. I have like low 30s.
Yeah, so to me that's totally playable. That like if you want to base, like if you want to put a bunch of pros in New York, then I think that that's
Yeah,
perfectly fine. Like you can
New
play
York
on
would
20
work.
ping, right?
You'd have
Yeah.
high 20s ping. I believe LEC for that whole league, they're obviously all based in Berlin. I think they get 18
Mhm.
ping. That's like their average ping is 18.
Well, and you also have to remember it's more about players that are trying to get into the LEC, or in the LCS's case, players that are trying to get into the LCS. You want the players that are going to be pro one day to be able to practice on good enough ping. And so if you put them all in New York, that is good enough ping to be able to get good at whatever the esport may be.
Yeah. And
Now,
this
I
is
understand the lower the ping, the better, right? So Chicago still makes sense for that. But I think there's much more of a in-person audience that you would get in New York, which to me is how you gain a lot more hardcore fans, the fans that get to go in person. Right now, the LCS studio is empty all the time because the games are at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the West Coast.
yeah. And living in New York is obviously going to be cheaper than living in Los Angeles or wherever.
Is it?
I mean, obviously you're not going to be living in downtown New York, but
Yeah. And I just need to make it clear. I realize that it's not super easy. Oh, just get a place in New York, lol. Like, it's probably super expensive. There's probably a lot of logistics issues. But if you're going to start a new esport, I would look at New York before I looked at LA. If you're starting a new esport, I understand LCS already established there. They're right across the street from Riot headquarters. I get there's probably a lot of logistics reasons for why the LCS is in LA. I'm talking about a new esport, a fresh esport. You want to build something new, I would go to New York.
yeah, I think obviously it makes sense for Riot to. It made sense for the inception of the LCS to be in Los Angeles, but I feel like you do have to ask the question as we are 10 years removed from the creation of the LCS, and due to the fact that the product has been declining over the last 4 years, you should ask the question if you are Riot, do we need to change the location? Is that going to help?
Yeah. They probably have asked that question many times. And I also want to shout out Unbeheld in the live chat saying that, like, there are some issues, like with cost of living isn't much better in New York. Like, that's still going to be an issue. I'm not saying there's no issues there, guys. But anyways, you are bringing up some fair issues. I'm trying to not ignore all those. I'm just saying that I think if you start fresh, I think you should definitely consider New York. Where are we going next, JNT250? I'm kind of bringing us all over the place. I apologize for that.
That's all good. I mean, we can shift to quick news, kind of. I mean,
Yeah, we've covered most of what we wanted to cover, right?
yeah, but this will
Okay.
definitely not be quick news, I'll say.
Okay, the long quick news. Let's go.
Yeah, one thing we kind of touched on it a little bit when we were discussing roster options, but I think I just wanted to bring this up again because I think there's a little bit more to talk about it, is Cloud9 Jack, offering up his whole Challenger League squad to LCS teams with no buyout. And
Yeah.
the main reason why I wanted to bring this up again is because Cloud9 has been one of the leaders in the LCS when it comes to developing talent and utilizing the Academy/Challenger League ecosystem to improve their LCS team and really get high returns on those investments, because we've talked about in the past players like Licorice, Zazel, Blabber. Maybe we can even throw Eminus in there right now. I know he was probably considered to be a starter anyway, but you look at Eminus right now and he's playing very, very well. But Jack, once again, being the development god, basically, and to know that he's offering up his entire Challenger League squad to LCS teams with zero buyout, I think proves that, he's one of the good guys. I feel like Jack has been attempted to be painted as the villain a few times throughout his time on Cloud9. One with him being rumored to be one of the guys talking about removing the import rule, the whole systems thing when LS got, fired from being the head coach. And I feel like this is once again another example of Jack being the good guy in esports.
So I do agree with you that I think Jack is a good guy, but I do need to play devil's advocate that there are some times that he isn't exactly the goodest of guys. Where like I'm just gonna point to the example of when he was paying Sneaky and Jensen as like owners. What was that? They was paying like equity or something, which was like against league rules or whatever. Which, if you ask me, I think he knew more than well what he was doing, and I think he knew that was wrong. But that doesn't mean that Jack is necessarily a bad guy. I think he was just trying to skirt the rules a little bit. But I think you're right though that like you know what he's saying. Look, I just want to get these guys into the pro league. Now I also need to acknowledge that I think there are some benefits to Cloud9 for him to do this. One of them is if you're a really, really good player, like General Sniper, for example, a really good prospect, and Cloud9 has a history of sending guys to LCS teams, isn't Cloud9 now the destination for where all the really good prospects are going to want to go?
Well, we
like,
even said this a couple weeks ago. Like, is it worth for these, Challenger League / Academy players to hold out on bottom LCS offers if they had the opportunity to play on a top Challenger League team like Cloud9,
right,
who has a very proven, track record of getting players into the LCS on decent to good teams?
Yeah, I just want to say that even though I think Jack is definitely a good guy in this situation, I think this is very calculated in realizing the esports market isn't really good right now. I'm probably not going to get the buyout that I used to get for these academy players. Why don't I just give these guys away for free and get them on LCS teams? And so next time there's a really good talent, a really good developmental talent piece that comes along, he's going to want to come to my org instead of me selling them for like 75K, right? Don't you think that's way more valuable? And so even though I think he's being a good guy here, isn't this just like a really good calculation?
It definitely is. I mean, it definitely
You
is.
see where I'm going with this, right? Like,
Mhm.
I'm trying to. I don't want people to think like, oh, Blue Jay thinks that Jack's definitely the bad guy and he's got, a card up his sleeve or something. But like, if you look at it that way, it makes sense to give away the players for free if you aren't going to get that much for a buyout from them, anyways.
Mhm.
Just saying.
Uh, Next up, another thing that I don't even know actually if we talked about this during the roster rumor section, but there was a little leak potentially on Berserker's stream where he was talking about that the LCS might potentially increase the import cap from 2 to 3. Now, once again, I guess I'd like to preface this by saying this was on Berserker's stream. He's not fluent in English. A lot of this he was doing literally through Google Translate on stream. So once again, we got to take that for what it's worth. But not surprising to say the least to hear that the LCS is once again considering the possibility of increasing the import cap. And I know that the common sentiment has been like, well, if we just keep increasing the import cap or we remove it altogether, like we're no longer a North American league. But I've never been a fan of that statement because a lot of the most popular players within the LCS and within the league are international players, ones who come to the league as imports, but often end up staying and become residents and become some of the best and most followed players in the league. So,
Sometimes
yeah, sometimes, but
I would argue that there's sometimes that where like they just have that big language barrier, and so it's really difficult to get them to do content. And some of the content is much worse because they're always having to translate for them. Whereas like I would argue the most popular players are the ones like Vulcan, for example, or Jojo Pyun, who are North American talent and stick around. So like I don't have anything against like your Berserkers, for example, and Prince. Clearly, there's a lot of guys that you could still cheer for that come from Korea and whatnot. I just think that the more this goes in the other direction, I think you're going to lose the opportunities to get your Vulcans and your JoJos.
potentially. But I guess my point is that like people, like fans don't resent international players for being in North America and being on North American teams. I feel like that's a sentiment that people try to say exists that, oh my God, the league's going to be so bad. How do I get invested in, these full international rosters? But they already are to begin with and they get support anyway. So I just think that if we did increase the import cap, yes, it's obviously going to hurt the development of the talent in North America, and there's going to be less opportunities for newer talent in North America to get to the LCS. But at the same time, if it means that we're going to have a more competitive league and better rosters and better teams and therefore more exciting games, I am all for it.
It's a trade-off, right? Because like I want to put this out there, like if we're always asking for the teams to do good content so we can get to know the players and whatnot, isn't it going to be way more difficult to do that if you do have a full Korean speaking team? Like one of the best things about Berserker, and like I love him in content, but it's always really good because Sven is there to talk with him and to get some, like, he speaks like really basic English so that Berserker can understand what's happening. And I think like the content with Berserker specifically is way better because Sven is there. You know what I'm saying? Or Fudge, for example, or whoever.
Mhm.
If you have a full LMQ situation, I don't know how any of this content is going to be consumable for fans.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe I'll reinstate my position because I definitely don't agree with the completely removing the import rule and just having full like Korean or Chinese rosters coming in. Like
Mm-hmm.
that I would not be a fan of, but increasing the import cap from 2 to 3, yes, it could mean that we just straight up get 3 top tier Korean players and then 2 North American players, but we're still going to have a lot of that, we have North American residents that are playing with imports that have already been in NA for a decent amount of time, who are either still listed as imports or have gained their permanent residency. So I think that increasing the import cap from 2 to 3 really is not gonna like change things for the most part. I think people are fearful that it's just gonna the floodgates are gonna open, but I think
Yeah,
the
people are
one
afraid of the slippery slope. That's what they're afraid of.
and even if that is the case, that's not a problem that the LCS would encounter for another 3 to 4 years. So
Maybe. Hard to say. We still don't know if the LCS is going to be around in 3 or 4
who
years.
knows? It might be the LCS plus CBLOL.
Yeah.
Next up, this is a topic we have not talked about in quite a long time, and that's partly because maybe it's safe to say this has been a complete failure. But Champions Queue, it's open again. It's going to be open in Europe when MSI is going on, and who knows? There'll be games, maybe not.
Yeah. It's I had hope for Champions Queue. I remember talking on this podcast that like, hey, maybe Champions Queue is a really good way to actually start to catch up to some of these other regions, because all the pros always complain about how their practice isn't as good because they got to play against one tricks. I don't know, man. I think it's good to highlight because it's going to be open again for MSI. So like, there's going to be some cool content around Champions Queue, and it's fun. But what's really sad is that it's probably just going to close right back up again once all the players leave. Once MSI is over, and we're just going to go back to wishing it was still around, wishing it was still being used. It feels like Champions Queue has become such an afterthought,
Yeah.
which is not what I thought we were going to be saying. What? How long has Champions Queue exist now? It started last year, right? So like a year plus one split.
Did it come out? I don't know if it came out right at the beginning of 2022. Did it? I mean, I don't
I
remember, to be
think it
honest.
did. I think it did. Maybe someone in the live chat can help us out with that one. I thought it did.
I thought it came out after spring ended, but I
I
don't
remember them
remember.
like closing it up and then reopening and closing and reopening and
I don't remember, to be honest. So
yeah. Anyways, rip Champions Queue. At least we'll get it for a little while. While MSI is happening, we're gonna have Champions Queue. There's usually some pretty good content that comes out of that, so that's something to be excited.
next up, I know we had a discussion about the salary cap in the LPL about a month ago, but apparently, according to some of the LCK sources, the LCK is soon to be adopting a salary cap. Now, from what has been said, I don't believe it follows the similar format to the LPL salary cap, where players are, placed in tiers based on, domestic league performance and international performance. So
Oh, that was weird. I forgot about that.
yeah, I don't think it's working in the same way as the LPL salary cap, but
Thank God.
good to know that they are introducing a salary cap, and hopefully they're doing a little bit differently than the LPL one, because I think both of us agreed that the LPL one was a bit whack.
Yeah. So for people that don't remember, I know you kind of just mentioned it now, but like there was like tiers. So if you were like a really good player, you were in a different tier where you could have a higher salary cap than someone who wasn't. It was weird. Like I guess we don't need to go too deep into what it was, but to me, I always thought it was really weird where like they're going to look at your stats and use analytics to determine what tier you should be in. And I remember giving the example of a player like Hillisang, for example, that engages a lot and dies a lot, might have worse looking analytics because of having so many deaths, but like he's your I'm engaging kind of guy. So like depending on your play style, the analytics could be favorable or less favorable for you, whereas like that might not be actually accurate to how valuable you are. And
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of weird.
I think also when a lot of rumors came out about the LCK adopting a salary cap, there were kind of some joint rumors going along saying that a lot of the LCK teams had been operating at a loss due to just the amount that they've been paying their players. I don't remember exactly which teams they were, so I won't comment, but I do remember there being stuff about T1. I don't remember if there were rumors saying that T1 was operating at a loss or if they were one of the few teams that wasn't. But I do know that with all those rumors, there were, strong indications that a lot of the LCK teams were operating at a loss.
This is kind of off topic, but I remember for like years there was so many discussions about whether the LCS should have a salary cap, but like I guess we don't need that anymore.
I want
Like
to.
if salaries continue to dip like crazy like they are and every team is going full budget mode.
I just
Uh
wanted to note, Unbeheld in the live chat was saying they should adopt the NBA model and pay a luxury tax. I believe in the LPL salary cap, that is how it works.
Oh,
There,
yes, it was. It was
there
like that. I
is a
remember
luxury. There is a cap. It's a soft cap. If you go over it, you pay the luxury tax. So for the LPL, I believe they are using a similar model to that.
there
Don't
was
know about the LCK.
You'll have to if you're really interested on Beheld. There was an article for it. I don't remember where it was. You'll have to go dig in.
I can find it right now.
But it wasn't that long ago, right? And there was like the specifics on how it worked. Or actually, the article was it only a rumor? God, now I don't remember.
No, that wasn't a rumor. It
Okay.
was they had implemented it already. The vibe was that they'd already implemented it. I found it already.
Oh, right. They had implemented it in like 2020 or something, but it was changing or it's been like over a month since we talked about it, so the details are a little hazy for me, but
Yeah, I just linked the article in the chat.
any other quick news, J&T?
Yeah, one more. We got another tainted mind scenario going on. Over in the LLA, the Kings have been expelled from that league and banned from all Riot Games events for failing to pay their players and coaches. So
we've talked a lot about
There you
teams
go.
failing to pay their players. Do you remember what I say every time we talk about this, J&T?
just pay your players.
No, I always give the name a more iconic duo every time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's what we say. We say that every time this happens. It's 2023. We still have esports orgs that are not paying their players. Unbelievable.
Yeah,
Crazy.
it's pretty wild. I'm trying to think. Like, when was Tainted Minds? It was season 5, right? Like,
Oh, was it that long ago?
I think it was season 5.
And then there was Sola Fide.
Yeah, that was season 10 or season 11.
Not that long ago, yeah.
Then there's this one, and then there was another one that we talked about sometime this spring, which I believe was another LLA team. Might have been a CBLL team, but I'm not sure.
Was there another OS team that we're forgetting?
Maybe. Oh, wasn't it Peace? Peace? That team?
Was it Peace?
I think so.
Yeah,
Might have been that
might
team.
have been it. Yeah. Oh, damn.
Yeah. Lamau.
Esports has got a long way to go, guys. Long way to go.
Random aside, but when John Needham in that interview said that North American Challenger League teams operate on a budget of roughly $500,000 to $1 million, that was kind of surprising. I was like, it was not a number I was expecting. I was thinking it was going to be a lot lower than that.
Well, everyone has to make at least 75K, right? All the players?
Well, is that the same? Well, this is for the Challenger League team, though. So
Yeah. I thought that was the same. No, maybe it's not the same. That's
LCS
not the same
and
minimum?
Challenger League minimum is the same?
I thought it was just players
Oh, I don't know.
had to be paid the minimum.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
I was just surprised to hear that Challenger League teams, their rough operating costs were $500,000 to $1 million, which I thought was surprising because assuming that they have to pay the minimum 75K to Challenger League / Academy players, that figure makes sense. But I figured that they were making less than that. So
yeah, and you got a bunch of coaches, and like Unbeheld is saying in the live chat, he says it's because in NA even support staff need to get paid to live, and of course,
obviously, yeah,
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, these costs add up, and that's one of the problems esports is having right now is that the costs are adding up.
Yeah.
You know what's weird though? So we just had a whole episode about talking about some of the unfortunate things about esports and about the LCS. Let me know if I'm crazy here, JNT. Am I just like ignorant if I say that I still believe esports is going to work one day?
Sorry, say that again.
Am I ignorant or am I just naive to think that I still believe esports will work one day?
Yeah, well, I mean,
I think it will too. I don't think it's going to
it'll be
be
good.
League of Legends that's going to be that big cash cow. Maybe in China, they're probably still making bank over there. I don't know. I have no idea. But in North America, I think we can probably say it's not going to be League of Legends, which is fine. I think that esports has a lot of growing pains to go through. And you know what the good thing is? This is maybe some copium, but I do believe it's true. Is that like the people that are still left in esports and that are going to remain in esports are the ones that you really want, right? Like there was all this VC capital that was coming in and all these people that didn't know jack shit about esports that were throwing a bunch of money and getting involved in esports. And honestly, when you think about it, it seems so obvious now, but did we really think those were going to be the people that actually grew esports into something real? Most of them don't know what the hell they're even investing in.
I mean,
And
part of the
so, go ahead.
well, was part of the reason why esports like League of Legends and Counter Strike and like Smash and stuff like that, are at the top of viewership and will continue to be till the end of time is because they were just naturally built through
Yeah.
the evolution of the game and esports itself. Where a lot of more modern esports, you can really see the sort of rise and fall in terms of viewership. You look at, I mean, it's especially prevalent in like the battle royale genre, but games like PUBG and Fortnite and now Apex Legends, like they have a really like the pendulum of viewership is like really extreme, and a lot of that has to do with a lot of money that just gets naturally pumped into the scene, and not a lot of it being just genuine interest for the sport and growth of the sport. It's just
Yeah,
we're trying to do this to make money.
and that's the area that I can cope with all this is that the people that are left over are not the people that are in it for the money. It's the people that are in it because they genuinely just want to see esports succeed, which is that I mean that is cope, but it feels good, man. Like if esports is going to succeed, I want it to be the people that truly care about it, not the people that don't know what's going on. So, yeah.
Oh,
And
we got
that's it,
MSI
right?
coming up soon, so once
Yeah.
again, hopefully once the MSI schedule comes out, we'll be able to let you guys know when episodes are going to be coming out. But MSI should be exciting. New format and everything. Golden
I'm looking
Guardians.
forward to it way more than I have in the past.
As of
It,
right
it
now,
should be
Golden
cool.
Guardians looks like they might have a tough time getting out of the playing stage, but we hope.
Will they do it?
No.
Should we save that for next episode?
Spoiler,
They're
no.
not getting out.
No way, man. Like, I'm sorry. They're not getting out.
What are we saying? Not getting out of? They're not getting out of play-ins,
They're
or they're
not
not
getting
getting
out
out
of
of what?
plans. They're not going to get
Hmm.
out of plans. I don't think.
Who's going instead?
Well, if I had to pick, the three teams who are going to get out of plans would be BLG, Billy Billy,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
G2, and
Yeah.
probably either Gigabyte Marines or PCS Talon or PSG Talon.
Mm.
That'd be my guess.
I'm not giving up hope. I'm saying they're getting out. Let's go, boys.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to Unbeheld, they don't have to beat BLG to advance. So they can advance without having to beat G2 or BLG, but they have to beat Gigabyte Marines and PSG Talon, which I think is unlikely.
Unbeheld's giving me the copium. Absolutely some copium, but we're doing it, boys. Let's go. All right, thanks so much, guys, for joining us for this episode. Appreciate all you guys helping us in the live chat. Got a lot of help from you guys in this one. I'm sorry that we can't always read all of it. It's really difficult to carry a conversation and also read a big wall of text, but we appreciate you guys hanging out and helping us when we're clearly missing some things. You guys are kind of OP for that, so we appreciate you so much. Remember, again, to subscribe if you're listening on YouTube. And if you want to know where else you can find us, you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And just search for the Clown Fiesta Podcast. You'll find us. And we always do episodes, or almost always do episodes, Sunday night, 7 p.m. EST, 4 p.m. PST on the West Coast. And so you could find us live and be one of these wonderful chatters that we have helping us all the time. So thank you guys so much. Anything you want to add, J&T?
No.
Okay. All right. Take care, everyone. We'll see you guys next time. This has been episode 122 of the Clown Fiesta podcast.